OSD, Economic Relations and DPA, as well as Dr. Sumit Seth, Joint Secretary, PPNR in the Ministry of External Affairs. Sir, it's quite late. I'll hand over the floor to you quickly.
Thank you very much, Arindam, Special Secretary Prabhat, Sumit, friends from the media, very good evening, and thank you so much for coming at this late hour on a Lodi evening. So first of all, wish you a very happy Makar Sankranti Lodi, and sorry to have pulled you away from your families on this evening when you want to spend the time together. But as Arindam say, we undertook a unique initiative, and the 2-day special virtual Voice of Global South Summit has just ended with the concluding session that was hosted by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. The overall theme of the summit and of the concluding leaders session also was unity of voice, unity of purpose. Prime Minister, as I had mentioned in my brochure before the summit began, Prime Minister also hosted the inaugural session yesterday under the theme Voice of Global South for Human-Centric Development. In addition to the two sessions at the level of the heads of the state, head of the government, there were 8 ministerial sessions held across various issues which are of relevance, importance and significance to the developing countries across the world. Some total of 125 countries participated in this new and unique initiative. These included 29 countries from Latin America and Caribbean, 47 countries from Africa, 7 countries from Europe, 31 countries from Asia, and 11 countries from Oceania. Clearly a strong and positive response across the whole world through the Voice of Global South Summit. The infographics of the global participation is on the screen on your left, on my left, on your right, for you to clearly see the geographic spread of participants from across the developing world.
Sir, we will share this with them.
Sure. So Arindam commits to sharing this with you for your reference and for your benefit. As you can see, this was truly a Voice of the Global South Summit. In addition, as I had mentioned last time also, we have also been in close contact with the developing countries that are G20 members also. One thing which came across clearly during the summit was the need for articulating the voice of the Global South in international institutions and for reforming them for a balanced representation of the developing world. This came out very strongly through the summit. In this context, I must mention that India's role, and in particular the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, was deeply appreciated across by all the speakers. It would not be incorrect to say that India's presidency would be the first ever G20 presidency perhaps that can claim to have captured the sentiment and views of the entire developing world, not just limit itself to the large economies' perspective. The summit, as you can see in numerical evidence, received a strong positive response across the world. The final number of participation would also tell you that almost all the countries accepted the invitation and participated in the summit. Participants during their interventions during the course of the summit and across various sessions thanked the Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi for his personal leadership, which was instrumental in conceptualizing and crystallizing the voice of Global South at a time which is particularly difficult for the developing world, facing as it is numerous challenges of economic and political across economic and political domains. There was also uniform acknowledgement that the agenda of the summit echoed very much the priorities, the perspectives and concerns of the developing world. In particular, Prime Minister's offer to share India's experiences and successful solution templates in various sectors, be it health sector, be it the sector of finance, in particular financing of development, financial inclusion, how to successfully deploy technology to overcome the developmental challenges and meet the developmental priorities and prerogatives in the developing world. Digital public goods, financial inclusion, our experiences in leveraging technology for development in the health sector, etc., was deeply appreciated by the fellow developing country leaders during this summit. There was also, of course, appreciation for India's willingness to assist the world in the past through the vaccine MEA. During the sessions, participants from across the developing world also shared their own experiences, their own concerns, their own aspirations, their own best practices, which they offered and they put on the table. Many of the participating leaders and ministers asked India to carry their voices into the G20 and other international groupings. There was a clear sentiment that the global south is being adversely impacted by developments that they did not have a role in creating and do not have a voice also in how these should be addressed. We would shortly be putting out a document that will capture the key elements of the deliberations of the summit. As you would have followed up closely, that in his remarks yesterday, our Prime Minister gave a call for 4 Rs: respond, recognize, respect, and reform in context of various priorities of the developing world. He also clearly told the participants, and I quote, that your voice is India's voice, your priorities are India's priorities, and I think nothing captures the summit's objective better than those words mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister yesterday. Today, as you would have again followed, Prime Minister also announced a number of new initiatives by India in connection with the Global South Summit, and these include Arogya Maitri, the Global South. He fleshed it out in some detail in his closing remarks. Global South Center of Excellence, Global South Science and Technology Initiative, Global South Young Diplomats Forum, Global South Scholarships. We deeply value the ideas and suggestions which have been put forward by the participating and the ministers during the Global South Summit. We would make strongest of endeavors to channelize these ideas, these priorities, their concerns of the Global South countries through the international platforms and, of course, including during the G20 presidency of India. The Summit of Voice of Global South is a unique beginning, a start which, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, allows India to chart a new path of greater collaboration towards realization of the priorities of the Global South. Thank you. I think I would end here, and if there are questions, we'll try and answer them. Thank you.
I see lots of hands. Hold on. Let me start with Sudeep today. I saw him first. I'll come back to you.
Sir, Sudhiranjan from Bloomberg, sir. Yes, sir. So on the finance issues and specifically on debt, what is the kind of responses or feedback that India has got, and anything in particular that India would want to take up to the G20 in this? If you could explain and give us an understanding on that.
I'll come. Yeah, next. We'll try to quickly.
Hello, sir. Rishikesh from PTI, sir. So, my first question is, sir, what was the reason behind informing China about the summit? What was the reason?
What was the reason?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Because
I get it. Go ahead.
And so, second question, sir. So, has India requested participant countries to provide any concrete agenda in near future that it can bring up at the G20?
That we can take to the G20?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Siddhant, go ahead.
So Siddhant from Beyond, the Prime Minister announced a number of initiatives, including establishment of the centre and scholarship. If any details can be provided where this centre will be established, the number of scholarships that will be given.
Right. I'll come back to you. 1 second. Yeah, please go ahead.
Vineet Dixit from Newsgate. Yes, sir. Sir, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it going to be a bigger movement than the non-aligned movement? 125 countries is a big success. And secondly, it's a virtual summit. When are we going to have a physical summit in future?
ambitious. I'll take one more round in this perhaps. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll come back to you.
Shyam Madhu from the Mint. Thank you for your time, Foreign Secretary. So, the non-aligned movement also has a scholarship program. It also has a center for science and technology and so on and so forth. Is it a worry that there will be some duplication of effort between the Voices of the Global South and the non-aligned movement? How are these two initiatives going to sit together?
So we'll just have this round and then probably a few more questions.
Thank you. I think let me capture a sense of the room in terms of the queries that the room might have in their own minds with regard to how do the specific summit outcomes and decisions that the Honorable Prime Minister announced, whether they in any way overlap, intersect, dilute, interfere with what you mentioned is going on in other fora in terms of non-aligned movement. It would also in some ways capture, Manish, your question. I think each platform, you would agree, has its own objectives, practices, history, membership, activities, processes in which they do that. We feel and we firmly believe that we felt that this initiative, which has been anchored by India under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, would be the most appropriate platform for our objectives, which is of a common platform for the developing world. Let me emphasize that this summit does not in any way dilute how India, as I mentioned last time to you also, engages proactively and robustly with other fora, whether it's the non-aligned movement or it is the G77. But given the current global context, we felt that it is important for us to shape a platform which captures this voice of Global South in a purposeful and meaningful way and carry it forward, as I said, to the other international institutions, including to the G20. With regard to the first question from Bloomberg, whether there was on the finance on the topics which were discussed in the finance minister session, whether there was anything specific, particular with regard to the debt. Well, as you would recall our opening presser on this subject, wherein I had clearly outlined that the financing of the development is one of the central and core priorities for all the developing countries of the world. When the finance minister session took place, there were 2-3 salient elements of it which you would have noticed, at least if you heard our finance minister speak in that session in her opening remarks. One, each of the countries did put forward the challenges that they are facing in terms of structural problems to some of the economies, to the challenges of the financing of the development, to the fact that how some of the international financial institutions need to scale up their game in order to meet those requirements. Naturally, the requirement that the financing of the development should be sustainable and less of a burden on countries' economic structures, including in particular terms the debt burden. This, of course, came out very, very clearly in the finance minister's session. Naturally, that was also the session which talked about how the countries can cooperate better in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of how to interface and leverage technology better to meet the financing needs, in particular the digital public goods in the financial sector, and how the development partnerships that are structured among the developing countries and with the developing countries should be more outcome-oriented, demand-driven, and more sustainable. This was in sum what formed the agenda of the Global South Summit, the Finance Ministers' session. On PTI's question of what was the reason behind informing China, requested concrete agenda, etc. Look, I had mentioned in my earlier intervention also when we had unveiled the organization of the Voice of Global South Summit that India has robust cooperation with the other countries of the G20 across all the agenda items that are focus priorities of the G20. And it is under that rubric that we consulted every G20 developing country with whom we have a strong development partnership. But as I mentioned in my opening presser also, the focus of the Global South Summit was on those countries who do not have the benefit of availing themselves of their presence in the G20 proceedings, but still of which there is a very critical need to pick up their voices, to channelize those voices into across institutional forum, and that includes, of course, the G20. As you would have noticed, each of the ministerial sessions had a specific theme. So the broad agenda items of discussion and specific sub-agenda items of discussions for each ministerial session flowed out of those broad thematic priorities of each of the ministerial sessions. Siddhant, to your questions in terms of the Center for Excellence for Global South, scholarships, etc. Look, we already do a considerable amount of capacity building cooperation. India does it with the whole host of developing countries. This is one of our strong areas. And today's Prime Minister's announcement and decision to enlarge the scope of these schemes and include and encompass the entire Global South into this is just another, a stronger and much higher level manifestation of those commitments that, as I said, of which we have a very strong experience. I think
Thank you,
I've
sir.
answered all of them.
Yeah. Fine. Microphone there.
Hello. Sir, this is Meghna Dev from DD News. Sir, can you elaborate on the kind of discussion that has happened on climate finance, and also if there has been any push for private capital for climate finance?
Private capital for conference. Okay. Okay. I'll let her answer. This is not COP, but anyway, go ahead.
So, Ayushi from ANI. So, were the global issues like terrorism and security challenges discussed too during the summit as we face certain challenges from our neighbors?
Okay, somebody else had a hand? Yeah, Abhishek.
Sir, Abhishek from CNN News 18. My question is regarding this Ukraine conflict that has been for almost 11 months now. Was it discussed, and also the impact of it?
Sorry, could you repeat? Ukraine conflict was discussed.
And also its impact regarding this grain crisis all over the world. Was that also discussed with India, and what was India's response to that?
Okay. Shinju.
Can I ask a question on some other issue as opposed to this Global South?
Please introduce yourself for the record.
This is Srinjoy from Times Now.
Yeah. We will do this briefing largely on the Voice of Global South Summit. If there's something related to that, happy to take the question, but if it's completely different, no. Yeah, please go ahead.
Karlul from The Hindu, sir. We saw some strong comments about the United Nations and other international institutions. The External Affairs Minister described the United Nations as a frozen in 1945 institution that's not responding to the challenges of the developing economies, especially after the Ukraine crisis. And before that, we saw your ambassador to the United Nations also talk about how
our ambassador.
Yeah, of course. How other organizations like the G20 may actually end up replacing the United Nations if the United Nations, remains in this state of, in this non-responsive state. And you are organizing this, massive get-together, of course, virtually as of now. So, is India really indicating that it's frustrated with the United Nations structure? And are you indicating that you are exploring other avenues, and this Global South Summit is one of the ways of perhaps mapping out your future course of action? Is India looking for an alternative global international institution like the United Nations.
Any other? Nothing. Okay, so we'll close with that.
Thank you. Meghna, to your question on the climate finance and whether the private capital for climate financing issues was discussed. The Environment Minister session, which essentially focused on discussions relating to this subject, principally kept its attention on one, balancing growth with sustainability, two, sharing of best practices in ecological conversation, three, the importance of Lifestyle for Environment initiative launched by Prime Minister in October 2022, live, the concerns of small island developing states. We heard them very loud, very clear, both during the leader level sessions and also during environment session, particularly the concerns of the low-lying coastal state, ensuring a stable and sustainable climate transition, some of the existential concerns which developing countries of the whole world have because of the climate change. You yourself heard Honorable Prime Minister speak today how the issues relating to climate change, in particular climate financing and climate technology, needs to be very strongly discussed, focused and cooperated among the developing countries, because the established institutions of the world which are supposed to address these requirements of climate finance and climate technology have really not fulfilled the tasks that they were supposed to fulfill. So this was broadly the specifics, broad outline specifics of the discussions during the environmental session. Aisha, with regard to the question on terrorism and security challenges, so when the Voice of Global South Summit, both in the opening and in the closing and in the foreign minister sessions, when the specifics of developmental challenges were contextualized, it was clearly admitted that one of the key context of the developmental challenges that the world faces is the challenge relating to the terrorism and the global political uncertainty, including the derivative impact of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which brings me to the next question which you asked, Abhishek, with regard to the Ukraine conflict. I think the specific derivative impacts, the challenges of food, fuel, fertilizer insecurities, and other disruptions in the supply chain, in the trade supply chain, in the technology goods supply chain, in the engineering supply chain that has occurred because of the on conflict. This was very much part of the conversation across various sessions, because this got captured across various sessions. With regard to what my external affairs minister said, which I think a colleague from Hindu mentioned, I think that statement speaks for itself. I don't think it would be correct for me to second guess my external affairs minister. He has spoken very clearly and eloquently on that subject. I will only repeat what I mentioned to you when we brought the news of this Voice of Global South Summit before you, which is that we often find that the problems of the Global South, their perspectives of their problems, their concerns which they have of the world, their priorities which they have of development, often do not get adequately addressed in the established and relevant institutional framework. We felt that there is a need for that voice to be heard, for those priorities to be understood, for those concerns to be addressed, and for those perspectives to be fully factored in across a set of all institutional mechanisms, including in particular G20. And we felt and we believe that this Voice of Global South Summit would very much help to serve that objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the detailed briefing, as well as thanks to Shri Prabhat Kumar and Dr. Sumit Seth. Thank you all for joining us today evening. We will share with you, as I said, the map of all the countries that have participated and other documents emanating from this summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.